Alrighty. The first trick is when you go to the washroom right before you talk, you make sure your mic's off. So, everything I learned about how to capitalize on chaos, I learned on a beach and because of country. In January 2020, my wife and I traveled to Kauai, Hawaii for her best friend's wedding. And at the time, everything on the outside was great. I was in a long-term career, stable engineering job in Edmonton, Canada. You know, we were in a long-term relationship. We were going to get married, and I was making mid-six figures. And on the outside, it looked great. But on the inside, it was a war. I was suffering from depression, panic attacks, and suicidality. Every day felt like I was in a battle. It was utter chaos. And we were walking down the beach, and, you know, it's a beautiful Hawaiian day, the sun's out, nice breeze, people are out surfing. And we come up across a clearing. And in the middle of the clearing, there's a Volkswagen van. And there's a Volkswagen van. And at the back of the van, there's a cardboard box filled with fruit. And there's a handwritten sign that says, take a fruit, leave $1. And in that moment, it hit me. It was the people who lived in that van were the ones out surfing, living life for free, one wave at a time. And there was a little voice in my mind and said, Rob, I would love to do that. Would love to throw it all away and just move to the beach. And immediately I had another voice, a stern, judgmental one. It was like, Rob, I will never. And it was in that moment that I realized that in order for me to escape what was going on in my mind and the chaos, I needed to change. And as Capel talks about, and we just talked about, in 2025, chaos is everywhere. You're seeing it politically where, you know, we're used to, you know, annual change or month by month. Now we see it tweet by tweet. In the economic markets, CEOs are just, at this point, some of them are just refusing to provide guidance. They're just like, it's too crazy. And then in their jobs and their careers, mass layoffs are happening all the time. And, you know, there's this race for efficiency or replacing people with AI. And we'll see how this goes. But, you know, we're MIT folks, right? So we don't rely on a few headlines to gain, you know? So I went out and I found this. This is the World Uncertainty Index. And basically what it is it's a percentage of the times the word uncertain or one like it is used in government reports around the world. And I really can't tell you why, but in the fall of 2024, it takes off like a SpaceX rocket. And so, under chaos, what happens to our brains? And in this part, you'll really be able to tell that I'm course 2 and not course 9. But our brains are designed to keep us safe and alive. And so that's why we like patterns. We like things we've done before, and we like control. Because then we can predict outcomes and we can make decisions that help us stay alive and get us the outcomes that we want. Obviously, chaos is the inverse of this. And so it makes our brains stressed out. And what happens is an amygdala hijack. And Daniel Goleman coined this term in his book, Emotional Intelligence. But basically what happens is the amygdala, which is kind of the animalistic part of our brains, takes over and shuts everything down. We lose problem solving, we lose decision making, we lose logic, we lose creativity, and we're left with 4 stress responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And no, fawn's not a joke about baby. It's people pleasing. And of course, if you think about those fear responses, there's not going to be a lot of innovation. We're not going to be able to really navigate well, because we can't make good decisions. And so when chaos rules the day, how do we keep it from ruining us and our companies? And the answer is to be able to cultivate inner peace or inner safety. So regardless of what's going on around us, we can still maintain our executive function. Now, sounds easy, right? But this is the transformation that we have to go through. And my favorite quote about this transformation is from Jamaican spiritual teacher Muji. And he says, step into the fire of self-discovery. It will not burn you, it will burn what you're not. And you're not fear. And as 20th century poet and thought leader Usher says, and as a shout out to Muji, I've created a 4-step process for this transformation. And obviously uses the word fire. And so the first step is finding your reset point. And if everything in your life is great, you're not going to have any motivation to change, right? And you need motivation because transformation is hard. I mean, it's not MIT hard, but it's hard. And so you do need a reason to get going. And so let me tell you about one of my former clients, Carl. So Carl was the CEO and co-founder of a manufacturing company that makes signs for franchises across the US. Signs like franchises like restaurants, hotels, and the like. And he came to me in March of 2024. And during our first call, he said to me, Rob, I want to scale my business to $10 million a year in revenue. I was like, all right, where are you at now? And he said they were stuck at $3 million for the past 3 years. And so that's how reasons work. When he was stuck, he felt frustrated. He felt he was working incredibly hard. He was working like 24/7, weekends, vacations. But he wasn't getting anywhere. He didn't know what to do. For me, the moment on the beach, it was really about getting rid of the internal chaos and finding more of this. But that's how it works. And so for you, just like you to think for a moment about the two pieces. The first piece is what's causing you suffering in your day-to-day. And that can be anything extreme, or it can be just like, maybe I don't like going to work, or I feel like I don't have purpose or meaning, or thoughts like I had. How do people do this for 30 years? And then on the other side of transformation, what are you trying to get out of it? What are you trying to achieve? Scaling your business? Is it getting freedom? Is it writing a book or doing a TED Talk? Whatever that is. And you need both of those sides so then you can get rolling. And that's what brings us to step 2. Because once you have motivation, now we can enter the process of transformation. And the second step is ignite your masks. Now, this is very difficult, if not impossible, to do alone. Of course, if you'd like to talk about this process and how it worked for you, I'll be here all weekend. But this is also where I will differentiate from most coaches out there. Most coaches out there, when they talk about mindset or they do that kind of work, it's like reframing. Sometimes it's positivist intention statements, or it could be something like emotional intelligence, right? Those take a long time to work. They also work various effectiveness. I use internal family systems, which is a therapeutic modality that works quickly and more easily. And how that kind of works It's like the movie Inside Out. It's like what you saw on, or what I told you about on the beach where I had two voices. And I'm sure you've all had those kind of moments. And this is Inside Out. If you haven't seen it, it's a kid-friendly movie, so if you have kids, totally go for it. But it's about a teenage girl, and she does teenage girl things. She goes to school, she plays hockey, she just has like a regular life. But the part that's very much like internal family systems is how they show up. This is the control panel in her mind, and at various moments throughout the day, these different characters drive her. And when we're in a stress response, that's what happens for us. We have these characters in IFS terms what we call parts, and they drive us in various moments of our life. We all in this room have a part that's a high achieving part. That's what made us do well in school, do the other things that actually got us into MIT in the first place. So, and again, if we're talking about IFS, the one thing is the founder of IFS, Dr. Richard Schwartz, he believes that there's infinite amount of parts. And he might be right, but as someone who's a coach for executives and entrepreneurs and high performers who work, I wanted to know how does this affect their performance and their leadership. And so I went searching for data again. And I found a groundbreaking study out of Sweden that was published in 2022. And that's what they found. And yes, you can tell that it's Swedish research because, hey, the Swedes are like the IKEA of research. Creative assembly stuff, but good luck making sense of the instructions. So let's simplify it a bit. Now, you don't have to worry about all of these. We'll get more into detail. But what I want to just note for folks is the non-destructive leader. This is you not under stress. This is when you feel safe on the inside. And so you can make good decisions, you can give good instructions, you can lead your team. It's not even saying well, it's just saying not in a way that hurts them. The other 6 parts are when people are under stress and they're exhibiting one of the 4 F responses. And the Swedish paper, all of those 6 leaders, destructive leaders. What does that really mean? It means that their behavior destroys corporate goals, destroys profitability, productivity, and also worker well-being. I like to call them the destructive 6. And yes, that sounds like a 2006 Fast and the Furious remake starring Vin Diesel. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the destructive 6, I want to make a few statements. The first one is we all have those destructive 6 inside of us. Now, some of them, typically it's around 1 to 3, will be more dominant than others. That means they'll just show up more often, right? For most of us, a high achiever one will be a very dominant part for us. But we all have all 6. And so as we go through this, I just want you to be aware of which ones show up for you and which ones maybe aren't as prevalent, because obviously you want to start with the big ones. The second thing here is once we become aware of these parts, that's when we can start to work with them to change and go through that transformation. And so I just want you to start with that as we go through. Just what do you resonate with? And there's no blame or shame around this because we all have this. We've all been there, including me. So let's start off with the 2 parts that show fight response. Again, something I just want to mention here is it's super common that we've learned not to exhibit these parts in behavior. And you'll see shortly why. But it's like some of these parts are violent or abusive. Often we do it in our own minds to ourselves. But we've learned, like, hey, Rob, you shouldn't say someone's an asshole at work. Right? So we shut that down, but we hear it here. Right? And the first part is the abusive, is the arrogant and violent part. Luckily, 5.5% of the workforce reports that someone whose boss is most dominant in this one. And yeah, like Jordan Ramsay's role in Hell's Kitchen is a perfect example of it, right? Especially when he served a souffle with not enough souffle in it. He throws dishes, he does it as people, it's all about him. The one that's most common is the abusive narcissistic part. And almost 20% of people work for a manager who has that as their most dominant. This is classically the Leonardo DiCaprio role from Wolf of Wall Street. He doesn't care about his people. He takes all the credit. He deflects all the blame. Even in this quote, he doesn't even care about his clients. It's all about him. Which brings me back to Carl. Carl is a high achiever just like all of us. Now, he didn't go to MIT, but he was on the U.S. track team as a decathlete for like 15 years. And so as a kid, he learned the same things that we learned. Be perfect. It's all on you. Rely on yourself. Do better every day. And he had a part that was abusing him every day. When he didn't go to practice and beat yesterday, he was like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? And I know a lot of us have that. I have one for sure. And on the one hand, it made him a great athlete. He was one spot away from making the 2016 Olympics. On the other hand, it also made him very successful at scaling his business from 0 to 3 million. But that's when it hit the peak. Because of the perfectionism, because of the way that it had to be done his way, he had to micromanage everything. And that's why he was working so hard, and they hit their limit. And then when he would get customer complaints, sometimes he would yell at his staff. And it took us 4 sessions. But midway through the 4th session, he looked at me and said, Rob, I'm holding my company back. And it was in that moment where that part ignited. Now, let's look at two parts that are kind of mixed in terms of the response. First one is the passive aggressive part. Bill Lumberg from Office Space is a great example. They use double speak, they use sarcasm, and actually people who have a manager who uses this most frequently, they burn out at the highest rates because they don't know what's real. The next one is the passive egocentric. They're similar in the sense it's all about them, but they won't do it in front of your face. So they do a team project and then they take all the credit for it. Those folks, right? Again, it's very much I-centric, but they do it behind your back. And then the last two are the flight, freeze, and fawn parts. The one is the messy manager. Michael Scott's a great example of that. His team doesn't really know what they're supposed to do. He doesn't set clear expectations. There's no clear goals. Everyone's kind of confused, right? These bosses can create chaos around them. And part of this can be people pleasing, or part of this can come from some version of imposter syndrome. Like people pleasing, like, hey, I asked Capella a question, he tells me one thing, I ask Nick a question, he tells me something else, that makes me flip-flop decisions, right? Or if I have imposter syndrome, maybe I do the same thing. Well, I'm not qualified to make the decision, so let's see what Brian says. Oh, we've got to ask Olga. And then I'm still not setting clear expectations. And the last one, the research calls cowardly manager, prefer the term ghost boss. But whenever accountability or responsibility comes up, they disappear into the bushes and homework. Which brings me back to Carl. I get a text on a Thursday morning from Carl, and he says, Rob needs help. They have time for a session with him. Sure. So we jump on a call, and he tells me that 2 days before, his biggest client came up to Household and was like, we want to offer you part of this nationwide rebrand of the cookies store. You've heard. And the project was worth $9 to $12 million. I was like, well, hell yeah, we hit our goal, right? Not so fast. He starts to tell me that he was worried about executing the project on time and on quality because it would take his entire staff 3 years to do it. And he was thinking, like, if we hire folks, we're not going to be able to get them up to speed and train them and do this so it will work. And then the last thing he says to me was he was thinking about giving away $6 to $9 million of this project. Yeah. It took us 15 minutes because it was so in our face. And then that one went up in flames. So how do you start thinking about the second step? Again, it's just reflecting. Which parts are there for you? Whether they're internal in your mind, or they also start to impact your behavior on the outside. And then when do they show up? Is it in these big moments? Is it in times where you feel like you're under attack? Is it times where it's like, shit, if I don't get this report out to my boss, like I'm in big trouble? Like these kind of moments, as we start to identify them, then we can start to work with those parts to let them know what's said. Which brings me to the third step. Rapidly transform. Once those dominant parts released, we have a moment where we see ourselves differently. You just realize that you're a different person. It happens in an instant. But the key part of it is how do we integrate that and become that person longer term? And so that's where this work goes. And so in that moment where Carl's ghost manager part ignited, he up-leveled from a high-achieving individual performer to now CEO of a company that does $15 million a year. But we needed to also integrate his behaviors in that way. And so we went back and we reassessed core values. Where are you at now? And he came out with freedom and family. And then I like to do the reflected best self exercise, which is simple exercise. You can literally do it anytime. But it's asking 10 to 20 people who are close to you, colleagues, friends, your family, and asking them to tell you a story of the time that they saw you at your best. And when they see you're at your best, you're not in fear, so you're getting the data. And once you can start to look for common traits, common behaviors, that's when you can start integrating those. And that gives you a better picture of who you are in your expanded self. And that's really the final step now, is expand and evolve your leadership. And so that starts with, what do we do today? And with this, that's when we started to make some of the changes with Carl. Since he no longer needed to micromanage people, we started needing processes, procedures, technology. Also, that helped him scale his team because he could scale and make sure he was putting the right managers in place and hiring the right skills, which ended up then like hiring a CRO and hiring professional project management and setting up all those systems. And for him, specifically, the behaviors were, and it was rocky. It was definitely rocky at the start because his team didn't really trust that he would change. So they were still worried about getting his approval on everything. Obviously, we had to start working with them to expand what they were capable of doing, and that the fact that if they made a mistake, he wasn't going to yell at them. Takes a little bit of time, but it ended up where people were more productive. They actually found better ways of doing things, shockingly, and they were happier. And along with that, right, given that he was able to now think more strategically, and he spent a lot of time with his co-founder, like looking at how he set up the company to do $15 million of business, it also allowed him to spend more time with his family because he no longer needed to be their approver on everything. And so this was when the first time after in January, he actually went on vacation to Disneyland with his family and he didn't even check his phone, which is like massive growth. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the second part of this with Carl because he's right in the midst of doing all the work right now. Oh, this is what I have to say. The next part of it, though, is really looking forward. And we didn't get to do this work with Carl because he's in the shit of trying to get this massive amount of work done. But it's all about now that you know yourself differently and you've taken this next evolution, what do you want to become? What do you want your life to look like? How do you want that to become you in the future? And my favorite quote on this is from actor, and some would say rock solid thought leader, Dwayne Johnson. And he says, think back 5 years ago and think where you are today. Think ahead 5 years and what you want to accomplish. And be unstoppable. And so it was just under 5.5 years ago, I was standing on the beach in Hawaii. And at that time, suicidal. I was working an engineering job in northern Canada. And 5 years later, I've done a TED Talk in Japan, which was seen by over 300,000 people. I got married to my wife. We moved to Costa Rica. We now have 2 dogs and a cat. And I'm over my fear of heights because I was able to unleash that one too. And I'm coming out with a book in the fall on this similar topic. And we're the same. We come from the same cloth. And so I just want you all to spend a moment, just imagine what life could possibly be, or what could you possibly want to create. And that's really, like, in that moment on the beach, I never would have been able to tell you what I would even think of what my life is now. But that's the cool part about this, is yes, maybe you don't have a clear idea, but once you go through this work, now you'll have a better idea. And I know exactly as a business owner, as a person, where I'm going. And I just want to leave you with that. It's just, now that you can think expansively, what would you want to build? What would you want your life to be like or feel like? And so that's it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So if you scan the QR code and just fill out the short survey, I'll send you all the first 2 chapters of my book, and then I also have an audio loop to start doing the work. And then if you want to talk about coaching, like obviously I'm here all weekend, or we can talk now, or if anyone has some questions, they can go for it.
Question. I'm wondering if is the fawn response similar to, in the people pleasing, that's similar to thinking about your career as like, oh, I have these check boxes, I have like this, I've achieved these questions, therefore I should be happy. But it's like that's almost like you're following a path decided by someone else. Like, is that also a type of people pleasing?
It's a good question. It probably depends on what part is saying it. I would say the check boxes is generally very high achiever, which is like, we all have that. Like, we thought, fuck, we got to get my team. Like, boom, there you go. people pleasing typically is like you're sucking up to somebody, or you're like, or you see this a lot with people who are just like burnt out because their family calls them all the time to do these small things. And they're just like, well, I got to help my mom or my sister because of this, because of that. And you're like, you really? Like, you're dying here. That's usually what you think, but it's really what's up here that's going to tell you the answer. Most people do that in probably 10 minutes. We can figure out what it is. Very good. Yeah.
Hey, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love your presentation. You said ask people when you're at your best.
Yes.
Did you ever consider asking people about when you're at your not your best? Right. So
You can totally do that.
yeah. Just think about those pain points, right? And then the second question I had was that chart on the Swedish research.
Yeah.
34%. I guess what they call non-destructive, right?
Yeah.
Does that research imply that 66% of the time that people are in stress? Did I read that correctly? Sorry.
Yes. So 65.1 according to that paper, which I would guess at this moment in time, that was like 2022. So like the research was probably 2021.
Yeah.
I would guess in this moment in time, there would be far more destructive leader behavior than there was in 2021 in Sweden. Just because like, the context of the world has changed. But basically that's what it means. And it means not necessarily like stress is like relative, right?
Yeah.
Like when we were at MIT doing a presentation, doing a piece that like we were under stress. And so like our high achieving part takes it over and is like, you work on this. Right? Now, the way, once you feel, like, they don't actually, when you ignite them, they don't go away. It's not like ego death, they die. But now what happens is they come in a way where, like, you can be the controller of them. So if I deploy my public speaking part for this, and it's different than my, like, I'm hanging out part. That's why, like, if you look at IFS, like, if the literature they call self-leadership, it's just a different energy, and you're, like, literally leading, like, little parts in your own mind. Yeah. It's wild. Yeah, sure.
What would you do? So I feel like I have a coworker who kind of in that situation takes on too much and like the fear is on the brink of burnout. What would you do in that situation?
Yeah, so it's probably a people pleaser or a high achiever.
Yeah.
You can't really do much about it unless you can tailor your workload. Like, you can always just not give them as much.
But if it's not so much of an issue of giving them as much as they feel that they need to take on,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean?
So they need
Yeah.
support. Like, I could help them, or if you could go to therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, it's ultimately, it's the, like, that's probably like a high achieving part. Or potentially, please, or you could be like, well, I need to work for Troy because Troy does it like literally says something about you. It's like, it's all their own stuff, right? And so it could be something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, do you do like besides individual work, do you do teamwork as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you find that like something like a disc is helpful, like where you place people in different understandings?
So what I'm doing, and actually I'm going to do it for Julian, is there's a saboteur assessment online. If you just go to like positiveintelligence.com, and it gives you 9. Eventually, I'm going to put this, like, I'm going to make my own survey, put it on my website as part of the book, but the positive intelligence one, it gives you 9. They're the same thing. It's like people pleasing, hypervigilant, hyperlogical, and it gives you a ranking, like a score out of 10 for all of them. And then you can work with the top, 1 to 3, depending on the scores. Thanks for coming.